Thank you for everyone who's here and online today. I'm Johanna Raudsepp. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Iceland. And today I'll tell you a little bit about our most recent work with barriers related to changing travel modes among Reykjavik residents. As you may know, emissions from daily mobility for Icelanders are among the highest in the Nordics, if not the highest. And this is largely due to heavily car-oriented infrastructure, but also car-oriented culture and lifestyles. At the same time, research has shown that the electrification of the transport fleet may not be enough to curb the climate impact, and our behaviors need to change as well. So right now in Reykjavik, we're looking at a situation where over 50% of trips are made by car, even among those who are living relatively close to work, under 4 kilometers. At the same time, active modes are used for around 10% of journeys only, or less than that, and public transport use does not exceed 30% of trips anywhere in the capital area. So in order to better understand this, right now we're working on a 2-year pilot cities project together with the city of Reykjavik, which is funded by Climate Kick. And then we at the University of Iceland are conducting the research portion of the project. And recently we published a paper on this as well, on the barriers to changing travel modes. So this is what I will be telling you about today. So to study this, we conducted a soft GIS survey. Now, a soft GIS survey is, you could say, a method of public participation. So it combines traditional survey questions with map-based questions. So a person can mark a point on a map and then answer questions specifically related to that point. So we get, in addition to regular survey type information, we also get spatial information about people's habits. And the survey was conducted early last year, so from February to the end of March. And we gathered around 1,800 responses from the capital area. And it featured several different themes. So transport, current habits and barriers to change. Then mapping questions about, for example, people's home, where do they work, what are the frequently visited locations. And of course, their social demographic background, life satisfaction, and pro-climate attitudes as well. I'm going to move this little box. That's better. And in addition to that, there you go. The survey also asked about recycling habits and barriers to changing those, but of course, today I will not be focusing on that part. So quickly about the results as well. So we wanted to know what are the barriers for people to switch their main mode of transport to either public transport or active modes. So for public transport, which in Reykjavik is, the option is just using a bus, the main barriers that people mentioned were that it just takes too much time. It is difficult to run errands with public transport. Public transport does not provide direct connections to where they need to go. It is not reliable and is too expensive for the service that it offers. And when we look at the barriers to switching to active transport, we can see that the barriers are quite similar. Again, difficult to run errands with active modes. Also, weather is a prominent one in this. Frequently visited destinations being too far apart, and that it takes too much time. And so overall, I would say that the main barriers to switching away from a car relate to really convenience and efficiency. So we investigated this a bit further and wanted to know what kind of background factors might be influencing people selecting these specific barriers. And we focused on the top barriers that I listed. So first, for public transportation, I know these results are there's a lot of them and it can be a bit confusing. So I definitely invite you to read the paper afterwards for like a nicer description of it. But first of all, for the barrier of taking too much time with public transportation, so people who own a car and live further from the city center were more likely to select this barrier. On the other hand, for example, for the barrier of too expensive, that the cost is too expensive, people who are older than 45, who are Icelandic, who have medium high level income, and who are more satisfied with public transport just simply don't find it, are less likely to find it to be expensive. The aspect relating to connections, for example, female respondents, those owning a car, were more likely to find the lack of direct connections to be a barrier, whereas Icelandic people were less likely to find it a barrier. Also, interestingly, people with higher climate concern were less likely to find the connections aspect to be a barrier. Reliability aspects seem to be more important for younger respondents and those with higher climate concern. But again, living further from the city, living closer to the city center, this should say further, I'm very sorry about that, but living further from the city center was indicative of finding it more unreliable. And lastly, an errands barrier. So similarly to the connections barrier here, female respondents and those owning a car were more likely to find this to be an issue with public transportation. I'm going to move on now to active transport. So we did a similar analysis there. One of the top barriers was difficulty running errands. And again, here we see that female respondents and those owning a car living further away from the city center were more likely to find the errands to be a barrier. Then we have the frequently visited destinations being too far apart. So here what stood out to me is that people with disability were more likely to select this barrier because likely because of some physical issues hindering them using active modes. And taking too much time, again, female respondents were more likely to find this to be a barrier, and those living further from the city center. So how I would kind of summarize this is that I'm seeing indications that female respondents are feeling kind of this household labor burden perhaps a bit more. It is the errands aspect, it is the time aspect, it is the convenience aspect that is more important for them. How it relates to owning a car, well, this is a connection that could go either way. So people are already owning a car, perhaps to mitigate these challenges that they're facing, and therefore don't really see the alternative as an option. Interestingly, also, we could see some examples of people with high climate concern finding certain things to be a barrier compared to people who have a strong belief in that their individual actions matter. And those people who believe in their actions were less likely to find a lot of these things to be a barrier for them. So perhaps these people are already engaging in these actions and therefore just do not find it problematic. Whereas those who are just still in the thinking stage, in the awareness stage, have not yet taken the action, still have a boundary there. So some general observations between the different mode users. We saw that both active and public transport users, so those who are using it right now regularly, were more likely to own a car for the purpose of running errands, and both found it difficult to run errands with active transport modes. And public and active transport users were also more likely to believe in the impact of one's individual actions compared to car users. Interestingly, also public transport users were more likely to own a car because they find it reliable. And active and public transport users were less likely to find weather to be a barrier compared to car users. When we looked at an aspect of like how do people commute to work on a daily basis, we actually saw that among those who take a car to work, there was, I would say, quite a good level of willingness to change the mode to something else. I think it was around 1/3 of the respondents who drive to work are already willing to change their modes. However, it appears that active modes are more likely candidate for them to replace a car than public transportation, which is, I would say, quite unusual, because typically you would want the public transportation to be a prominent choice. And To provide some further context, some of the main challenges that Reykjavik is facing, one of them we could see in our analysis as well, was that parking availability. It encourages people to use a car to get to work. Another aspect was that many people said that they own a car because they need to take their kids from A to B after school activities, things like that. So I think it indicates that children are to a certain extent not able to commute independently, reliably, and safely. So parents feel that they need to transport them by car during their working day. Also, another challenge is that it appears that daily errands, such as going to the grocery store, which is quite a frequent activity for all of us, require a car. So even those who mostly use public transport still feel like they need a car to get this aspect of their life done. Interestingly, in 2025, the city increased public transportation frequency, but we're still kind of stuck in like a gridlock situation because the infrastructure still favors cars. So here I like to show this is a screenshot of my own phone from our bus app sometime in early December. So this was after rush hour. There were no weather conditions that were kind of hindering traffic at the time. And I was in particular waiting for bus number 12, and that's why I was stalking it on this app. And on this stretch of road here, there was about 7 or 8 bus number 12s stuck in traffic. And so you can clearly see that indeed the frequency has increased, but it is still not getting through the traffic, so it is very much inefficient. And we were also seeing indications that active transport infrastructure, particularly for cycling, is still lacking in central areas. People were mentioning that it tends to go east-west, but not so much north-south in its direction. So that is something the city can tackle as well. And now we're in kind of the next phase of the study. So we have already conducted focus group interviews among different neighborhood groups in Reykjavik. And then we are actually just finishing the collection of a new round of survey data, which is partly similar, but partly different. So it actually just finishes data collection on next Monday. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of illustrate the situation with some quotes from these interviews. So one person said that if buses would work properly, they would take them now. Very simple, straightforward. Another said, but the car is actually just more convenient, and you can control the driving. You're not at the mercy of crazy bus drivers whose driving style makes you feel sick. Another person mentioned that they feel like the bus system is set up so that you want to go to the city center or from the city center to somewhere, but connections, smaller connections between the areas are still inefficient. And one brought out challenges with the cycling infrastructure. So on paper, we have a lot of cycling lanes, but in many places they are still a picture of a bike with 2 arrows on the car road or on the side of the car road. It's not isolated with any kind of barrier. So as a cyclist, you genuinely feel safer cycling on the pedestrian path, endangering pedestrians, than being among the cars, because cars don't seem to be aware of these signs on the road. And especially, let's say, in bad weather conditions, these become almost invisible. So many challenges there. And I think that is it from me about our project. So if you want to read a bit more about our ongoing work, then I invite you to scan the QR code. But yeah, happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.